Property markets are generally quiet over the Christmas and New Year period until about February. But this year there is a new challenge, the bushfire crisis. The extensive loss of homes is expected to create widespread housing stress. And joining me is Nerida Conisbee, Chief Economist for REA Group. Great to see you this morning, Nerida, but we'll start with obviously a very sad situation, the devastating impact on the bushfires. Of course, hundreds of homes have been destroyed. What do you think the impact is going to be, not only in housing but also the rentals?
Yeah, we have obviously a very distressing situation at the moment for people trying to find emergency accommodation. But rental demand is something that we are starting to see really big surges in towns close to bushfire affected zones. So somewhere like Bairnsdale's a fairly small town. It doesn't have a lot of rental accommodation, but we are seeing lots and lots of people searching. So no doubt real estate agents in the area are being inundated with requests for accommodation.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we can compare it to, I know that you've got some information on the Kinglake and St Andrews region that were impacted 10 years ago.
Yeah, look, what we found was that eventually these areas do recover. Obviously, there is a time period in which people do have to make a lot of tough decisions. I mean, the first one being whether they stay or they go. They need to wait for insurance payout, so that can typically take quite some time. What we found post-Kinglake and the St Andrews fires, the Black Friday events in Melbourne, was that post-bushfire, a lot of people sell up. So obviously people are very nervous about what's going to happen next. They're fearful of a similar occurrence happening again. But longer term, these areas do tend to go okay. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that better homes are typically built. So, obviously homes that are perhaps more have better ability to deal with fire and fire situations. We also likely see greater things happening in terms of preventing future fires as well. So I think that might have a little bit of an impact. If you have a look at Kinglake and you have a look at St Andrews, in the end they have done quite well over a decade, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are just very nice places to live. So unfortunately these areas where bushfires occur, on one hand, they are prone to high levels of risk, but they are also areas that people like living in.
Yeah, and everyone has been so resilient, haven't they? Let's talk about the auction activity, because it's generally quiet, isn't it, over Christmas and early New Year. What about over the next few weeks as we lead up to February?
Yeah, look, we're not seeing much auction activity at the moment. We do expect to see a bit of a jump as we head into late January and early Feb. At the moment, what we are seeing is that prices are continuing to recover. It is very much being led by premium Sydney suburbs, so places on the northern beaches, inner west, inner east. It's starting to spread into other parts of those markets. So we're starting to see places like northeast Melbourne, northwest Sydney starting to really pick up in terms of pricing. We're also seeing a lot of offshore demand coming back. So that was something that we weren't seeing much of at all. So that's really good news for off-the-plan developers. Rental demand is still quite weak in Sydney. So there's really mixed things happening in the market. But overall, we can see we are in for a quite steady recovery as we head into 2020.
Okay, and what about for regional areas as well?
Yeah, look, obviously regional areas are quite mixed. I mean, if you have a look at places like Northern Rivers, a lot of that area is doing pretty well in terms by places like Byron Bay and the like are doing quite well. For other regional areas, it is really hard to work out what's going to happen. I mean, we have such high levels of distress at the moment with the bushfires. So, there is going to be a lot of problems in those markets for quite some time.
Yeah. All right, let's talk food retailers, because Red Rooster, the line there, strikes again. Yeah, there was an interesting article. It's actually a couple of years ago. The University of Sydney's student newspaper put up did an analysis of Red Rooster and where they're in Sydney, and the fact that it does provide a bit of a demographic line in Sydney between the east and the west. It's quite interesting, though, that housing prices also follow that line. So what we have seen is that most $1 million suburbs, I mean, not surprisingly, most $1 million plus suburbs in Sydney are located in the north, increasingly the northwest, south and the east. If we head out west, it does become far cheaper.
It does also follow the recovery in the market. At the moment, you know, as I mentioned, we are seeing very much a recovery that's occurring in the east and the north, but it is slowly spreading out west. So typically those markets, they do pick up eventually in a housing recovery, but it does take a bit more time than it does compared to some of the more expensive suburbs of Sydney.
And homelessness, Nerida, increased by 8% when housing costs jumped by 10%.
Yeah, there's been some interesting work done by Ahuri. So they look at a lot of housing distress across Australia. One of the findings that's been found globally is that when housing costs increase by 8%, we do see a jump of homelessness by 8%. So, you know, although we do talk a lot about the positives of high house price growth, unless it does impact other parts of the economy positively, that, you know, it really doesn't lead to a very positive situation. And obviously homelessness is a big one. So Ahuri have found that there are growing levels of homelessness in cities that are becoming very, very expensive. So if you have a look at places like Sydney in particular, Melbourne as well, where we have seen huge price growth over a prolonged period, it is leading to higher levels of homelessness.
Yeah, well, it's always great to see you, Nerida. Thanks so much for your expertise. Nerida Conisbee from REA Group. We'll see you again next Saturday.
Thanks. See you then.